Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning into today's Author Talk series brought to you by the Library Speakers Consortium. The Library Speakers Consortium is a partnership of more than 450 library systems across the US, Canada, and New Zealand with the goal of making Author Talks more accessible to communities of all sizes. I am Brandon Adler, your host and moderator in conversation with each of the amazing authors that you will hear from throughout our series. Today, I am so excited to be here with international best-selling author Liane Morarity to chat about her newest book, Here One Moment. Hi, Liane.
Hi, Brandon. Nice to be here.
Thank you for being here. Everybody's super excited to dive in. I already said that, but before we do begin, I need to give kind of that standard housekeeping information that keeps everything running smoothly. We have compiled some questions that were pre-submitted with registration, so thank you for submitting those. But you may also continue to submit your questions during the talk by clicking the questions button that's just below the live stream video. You'll see 3 tabs there. The one in the middle is questions. If you're already in full screen size, you might need to minimize that screen so that you can see the tabs. Keep in mind there are a lot of you tuning in today, so we will get to as many questions as time allows. And don't worry if you have to leave early for any reason whatsoever. All registrants will receive a link to the recording in about 24 hours. Now to formally introduce our guest. Liane Morarity is the #1 New York Times bestselling author of Truly, Madly, Guilty, Big Little Lies, The Husband's Secret, The Hypnotist's Love Story, What Alice Forgot, Apples Never Fall, and Here One Moment. She lives in Sydney, Australia with her husband and 2 children. Thank you so much for being here, Liane. Welcome. How are you? I know you must be a little fatigued by now. We're the last stop on your US tour, yes?
That's right. So I'm at a very strange, I'm feeling very peculiar, but I'll try to seem like a normal person.
Well, I would imagine that you've also gotten your groove at this point in talking about the book.
Yes, exactly. I have, but so much in the groove that then I think, surely I just said this. Didn't I just say this a second ago?
Well, I know that the very first question that I love to ask, because it gets asked more than anything, is about an author's journey to writing. And true to form, JW from Burlington Public Library, as well as several other people, said, what inspired Liane to write? Can you talk a little bit about your journey to writing?
Yes, sure. So when I was a little girl, I'm the eldest of 6 children, and we always had a lot of books in the house. And by that I don't mean in an academic way. We weren't the sort of family that sat around and discussed literature. I mean more that my dad had a whole office full of airport thrillers, and then my grandma had a whole book chest full of the classics. So I had the classics and airport thrillers. And I used to love writing stories, and so did my next sister down. And when my dad discovered this, he actually said, well, I will commission your first publishing deals. And because we didn't have agents, we couldn't negotiate a very good deal, but we got $1 for an exercise book filled with words. And I still actually have volume 2 of The Secret of Dead Man's Island, it was called. And then he had a plastic roulette wheel, and he'd win back all the money that he'd play roulette against us and win back all the money that he paid us for our writing. And so then as I grew up, I lost that sort of crazy self-confidence that I had as a little girl, and I started to become more critical of my own writing. And so I wrote less and less. I had a career in advertising. So I always wrote in some way for my career, but I wasn't, and I was writing maybe a few chapters of novels that never went anywhere, until the day that I got a phone call that changed my life. I was working in the corporate world. I had the big shoulder pads, and the phone call was from my sister, my younger sister, to tell me that her first book had been accepted for publication. So basically she had achieved our childhood dream, and I hadn't even given it a shot. So I can always remember that I love her dearly, so I was very proud of her. But at the same time, I was filled with a sort of rage because
Hmm.
she'd done it first. So it was sibling rivalry that inspired me to write my first book. And so that's exactly what I did.
That's a very interesting story. Is writing the only place that you have sibling rivalry?
Well, now we have, we do have rivalry about lots of things. For example, about who could do, and I've actually put some of this in here one moment. I've got the sitting to standing longevity test, which is where you have to get up from the ground without touching you just stand up. So we were all trying to do that. Anyway, I am the loser in that one. And the other thing, because now 3 of the 6 children are writers, and there is a lot of competition for family anecdotes to use in our writing. So if my mother calls, I will often say, "Stop right now. I want it on the record that what you're telling me is mine for my novel."
Oh, wow. I like that. Well, I want to jump right in to hear one moment, especially because I saw an airplane go by, so I felt like that was the cue that we should just
Did
go straight to
you?
it. Can you please give everyone a quick summary of Here One Moment? I know that quite a few people that tune in haven't read it yet or haven't finished it quite yet.
Yes, so Here One Moment is the story of a woman on a plane. The plane is coming out of Hobart Airport, which is Hobart in Tasmania. Tasmania is the little island state at the bottom of Australia, which often gets left off the maps, and all the Tasmanians get very cranky about that. Yes, it's very appropriate because I'm at an airport hotel at the moment. Yes, this woman. Oh, first of all, there's a long delay. So everybody's sitting on the tarmac for a while. So it's been a very claustrophobic sort of environment. And then 10 minutes before the plane is due to land in Sydney, a very ordinary seeming woman stands up and begins to walk down the aisle of the plane, and she's pointing at every passenger and she's telling them how and when they're going to die. And so some passengers don't take much notice. Some passengers feel a little pang of fear, and then they all get off the plane, and a lot of them don't think about it much after that until the day that the first prediction comes true.
Mm. Yes. It's something that I couldn't imagine if somebody said that to me. It would be all that I could think about. And I know that
Mm.
the characters, that is indeed what happens. Colleen from Mountain View Public Library is saying, what inspired you to write Here One Moment?
So I was inspired when I was on exactly that flight myself. So I was coming out of Hobart, and I just spent a week's riding. So my thoughts, so I've been on my own a bit. So my thoughts had definitely turned inward, and there was a long delay. And so I was sitting on the plane, looking around at my fellow passengers, and the very cheerful thought came into my head that every single passenger on this plane was going to one day die. And when I look back now, I think there's a number of reasons why I was sort of thinking about my own mortality at that time, because in the preceding years there'd been consecutive years, a few things that happened. So first of all, my sister was diagnosed with breast cancer. Then I lost my dad. Then we had the pandemic, and then I myself was diagnosed with breast cancer. And so it was just at that time in my life. Also, just being in my 50s, I think, is a time when you're thinking about your own mortality. I read an article recently where they described the time between your 40s and your 60s as sniper's alley, because that's a time that you're most likely to be diagnosed with get a serious diagnosis.
Wow.
And interestingly, a couple of people at events, when I've mentioned that, they've come up to me and asked me to sign their books. Welcome to Sniper's Alley. So, so that's the time that's the state of mind. So I was looking around at the other passengers and I was thinking, so will you be the person that makes it to 100? Will you be the person whose life is unexpectedly cut short? And then it occurred to me that in 100 years or so, those that information would be available, as in somebody would be able to look back and look at the names of the passengers on that flight, and they'd be able to say the age of death and the cause of death for every single passenger. And for some reason, that sort of blew my mind that those were facts, and they're just not facts that were available yet. And that's when I thought, imagine if somebody stood up and shared those facts.
Mm-hmm. Did you do any kind of actuarial research on, like, if there were 50 people all in the same room or on the same plane, the likelihood of those living to 90 or 100 versus those not?
No, I didn't. No, I didn't.
I thought about that for some reason. So it's interesting then to think about the theme of fate in the way that you describe your inspiration, because had you not been on the plane, maybe this book would not have existed.
Exactly. That's true. So, was it my fate? But I catch a lot of planes. But maybe the delay might have also helped, and also the fact that I was on my own. So yes, you're right. But yeah, it's interesting because since writing the book, I've talked to a lot of people about fate, and there are some people who say everything happens for a reason, and everything was meant to be. And so I like thinking that that was my fate, that I was going to write this book, and I like thinking I went through all those bad boyfriends to meet my husband. And I like thinking it was my fate that I would get that call from my sister and now I'm a novelist. But I don't like the idea of fate then when it comes to bad things that you see on the news happening to little children. That's where I can't think. So I think fate's a nice thing that we can tell ourselves that was meant to be. But I don't think that it was meant to be that innocent children's lives are cut short. So that's why I would answer, no, I'm not really a believer in fate, except when it suits me.
Yeah. Yep. So we have a lot of questions about organization and kind of plot management. Jennifer from Westland Public Library says, "Are you a plotter or a pantser?" And along with that, Val is saying, what is your writing process? Do you set time aside every single day? Do you have a ratio of researching versus time spent writing?
Yeah, so I'm definitely a pantser. So I go by the seat of my pants rather than being a planner. My sister, who's the author Liane Morarity, she is a planner, and we've both tried each other's way of writing, and we can't do it. So I just start with a premise. In this case, I had the premise of somebody stands up and, as I said, and hands out these predictions, and I did not know what the ramifications of those predictions would be. I did, and I would have discarded the idea of the book if I hadn't worked out who she was, which I won't say because that's a bit of a spoiler. But so I knew those two things. I knew who she was and what she was going to do. But I didn't know who else was on the plane with her or what those predictions were. So I just start writing. So I would say it's a really fun way to write because I sit down at my desk and I wonder what's going to happen today. But it's also a scary way to write because I hope something happens today. So there's a lot of going back and forth. So I'm always thinking to myself, as I'm writing. So maybe this will happen, or maybe that will happen, and it's just in the process of writing that it gradually becomes clear to me. So there's some quote, I can't remember who said it, but something about you're like a car driving in the dark, and you can only see as far as you can't see your final destination. You can only see as far as the headlights in front of you. So
Mhm.
that's exactly what it's like for me. Um, and I'm not somebody with a really strict plan. I love hearing about other authors who have strict ritual where they sit down and they have this cup of tea and they go for a walk in the woods. But I have two teenage children. I guess I tend to write when they're at school, and I write a lot more when my deadline's approaching, because mainly because the story then has momentum. So by the time I'm 2/3 of the way through the novel, I know how it's going to end, so that's an amazing feeling. Um, I am a bit of a word counter. I know Stephen King, he said write 2,000 words a day. My rule is that I must write, in the beginning, I must write 500 words a day. But when I'm coming towards the end, then I must write 2,000 words a day. And I have a little book where I record how many words I've written, and I give myself little gold stars and well done, Liane, if I've written a lot that day.
I love that. Uh, Rebecca is saying, how do you manage plot when you write with multiple character perspectives, which is now even more amazing to think about since you're a pantser?
Well, for me, I think that's probably one of the reasons why I do like writing from multiple characters' points of view, because then I can put that character to one side and I go into the other person's perspective, and so that character's in the back of my mind, and I'm not sure what's going on with him or her. I'm just now focusing on this character, and I'm taking the story just a tiny bit further. Um, and so what I do always like to say is that it's not doesn't mean that it falls perfectly into place, because I am working it out as I going along. So that means that I always have a separate document called things I need to fix. And so, for example, in Apples Never Fall, with the character of Stan, I realised that it was important that he did not own a cell phone. And as I was writing, I realised, oh, actually, in the first chapter, Stan's sitting there in bed and he's scrolling on his phone. So the first thing on my things I need to fix list was take Stan's phone away. So there's all little things like that, and also things like, so you need to go back and put in a red herring here, or this won't work anymore, like the phone, or you'll need to some foreshadow this. So there's a little bit of going back and forth and some things, it's great when something happens organically where I'm working out the plot and then I think, oh, that little point could now mean this, but other times I have to go back and sort of shoehorn in a little foreshadowing or whatever.
Mhm. Thomas from Middletown Township Public Library has questions about a general question about the characters in this novel. Thomas says, do the characters in Here One Moment look at their lives in terms of fate versus free will? Are different characters on different sides of this question? Um,
Uh, yes, well, I thought when I first came up with the premise, I thought that the characters might have, um, I had this sort of grandiose idea that maybe the characters would have these amazing revelations about the way they lead their own lives. And then what I realized was that even if you're given a diagnosis by um, a doctor, the first thing you say, you normally react with disbelief and say, no, I don't believe you. And then you say, well, I want a second opinion. And then you say, well, I want to try a different treatment. I want to enroll in a clinical trial. So I realised that each of these characters, if they were told that, the most likely reaction is that they would try to fight their fate. So if they're told they're going to die in a workplace accident, they're not just going to keep going to work. So that became one of the important sort of themes of the novel. I never set out with themes, but this sort of emerged of free will versus destiny. And the main character is really the one who explores that. And I think I myself are trying to keep a balance between both sides of the argument. But yeah, the characters are really just immediately caught up. I think all of them really with I don't want this prediction to come true.
Yeah. Robin from Loyola Notre Dame Library wants to know what character was the most difficult for you to develop and why, as it pertains to Here One Moment.
They all had, I'm trying to think, they all had certain difficulties. Cherry, who's the woman who stands up on the plane, I think it was probably her because I gave her a whole lifetime, which I don't think I've ever done before. Mostly my novels are set within a really distinct period of time, but she sort of tells her life story. So there was that, and also, yeah, I can't give it away, but then I had to learn about fortune telling, so there was that side of it, and there was a lot to her personality. Yeah, she was a tricky one. So that's the answer for various reasons.
Shelley is saying your search history must be really interesting. Having to look at things like with what ways characters are going to die, and is there really an Australian Psychics Association?
I'm trying to remember if there really is an Australian Psychics, because I would have Googled that. And yes, you're right. I do sometimes think of the things that I Google, how to murder somebody without, which, yeah, would look terrible if, and that's what this book is about, also about coincidences. Terrible coincidences can happen. So if somebody happened to, anyway, I'm getting caught up in, I have a terrible fear of being put in jail for something that I did not do, and yeah, my search history could put me there. And yeah, and I don't remember if there really is an Australian Psychics Association. Probably.
Well, everybody's Googling it now, I'm sure.
Yes.
So we have several questions about your inspiration for your characters. Lisa from Dare County Library saying, from where do you draw the inspiration for your characters? I've loved all your books, so I'm very curious. And Rebecca, sorry, not Rebecca, Sandra also is asking the same question and saying, do you create all of your characters, or are they kind of like those anecdotes you were talking about, the family anecdotes that get to make it into the book?
I do create them, but often I get help from people in real life, as in I would never steal an entire personality, but I do sometimes help myself to an attribute. And so I can always remember, and it sort of seems to help me if I start with somebody I know, a particular attribute of theirs. So I can always remember with the character of Madeline in Here One Moment, not in Here One Moment, in Big Little Lies, when I was trying to create her character, I wrote perpetually outraged, like so-and-so, and a shimmery, sparkly girl, like so-and-so. And I had those two attributes, and then I started writing her, and then she became somebody entirely different from both of those people, but those two attributes are what got me started. So something sort of magical happens when I start writing them. In the beginning, I always miss the characters from my previous book because I know them so well, and my characters in the beginning feel sort of cardboard-like, and I'm trying to make them move and say things, and then something happens, and then then I know them. And that's when I often have to go back and say, oh, okay, Madeline would not have said this. Now I know her, so I change some of those earlier chapters.
Mm-hmm. Do you ever tell the so-and-sos that they were the foundation of a character?
So in that case, I did tell the shimmery, sparkly girl that she helped inspire Madeline, but I did not tell the perpetually outraged friend, because she would have been outraged.
In perpetuity.
Yes.
Katie from LA County Library is saying, what did you find most interesting when writing about the themes throughout your book, anxiety, fear, mortality, grief, and hope? Did they resonate with you, and how? I know that you said earlier that you don't really start off with thinking about certain themes, but as you were writing and seeing them emerge, I guess, did they begin to resonate with you?
Yes, definitely. And it was something then that I was thinking about a lot, and thinking about destiny. Yeah, and just talking a lot to people, and it was really interesting, those people who say, who so strongly believe that everything happens for a reason. And you can't argue with them, because whatever happened was meant to happen. So that's just the way it is. There's no argument against that, which is why I put that quote, the Stephen Hawking quote at the beginning of the book, that I've noticed, I've now forgotten, I've noticed that even people who believe in fate or something like that still look both ways when they cross the road. Oh, you can look it up for me. Thank you.
Here we go. I've noticed that even people who claim everything is predestined and that we can do nothing to change it look before they cross the road.
Yes, yes. So we are all making little decisions every day. But yeah, people who really believe in determinism would say that I have no choice but to make that decision. But I prefer to believe that I have free will. And I always remember, as I was writing this book, and I was thinking to myself, oh, anything, I thought anything could happen. And I was thinking, even if I've got something inside of me right now that could be the thing that kills me, that's an incurable something or other, maybe right now there's also some lovely young person who is thinking, is choosing between two university courses, and they might be going to choose the one and become a scientist, and they'll be the person that discovers the cure for whatever I've got. So we're all just making lots of decisions, and yeah, and so it gave me a feeling of peace, really, to think I could do whatever. I could start running marathons. I won't start running marathons, but I could. You just never know.
Martin said, what does the book say then for you about the power of words? And it kind of makes me think how one would react if they were on a flight like that. Just even 4 little words can completely change the way that you think about the rest of your life.
Yes. And I think words are powerful. So it's a terrible thing what this woman does. And in fact, somebody told me at an event recently that a relative, I think, of hers, was told that she was going to die in her 40s, and she worried about it all those years until she reached that age, and then she lived many more years and died in her 80s, but it just stayed with her for all that time. So yeah, and the power of a cruel comment. My grandmother, I can remember in her 90s, still remembered things that were said to her when she was a little girl. So words have incredible power.
Absolutely. Lisa from Morse Institute Library says, in asking these questions of free will, grief, love, and destiny, is it your hope for the reader to at least consider a belief in a higher power?
I sort of explore, I'm asking questions, not answering questions the whole way through. And so the main character, Cherry, is asking all those questions, and she's going back and forth between logic and spirituality. But I never set out with a particular message. And I feel like every reader will take something different from it. So some readers, I think, read it just as a thriller to think, so what's going to happen? And some readers just enjoy the characters. Um, and some readers, if they've been dealing with grief, that's the thing that resonates with them. And some people think, okay, how am I going to live my life? You know, they're living to the fullest, and all the things that the self-help books tell you. But really, all I really want, and I hope it doesn't seem trite to say this, but that when they turn the last page is that they think, I'd quite like to read another book by this Liane Morarity, as opposed to having any great revelations, although it's lovely if that happens.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that you have succeeded there. Anne is saying, your foreshadowing is excellent. Do you ever get stuck on how to drop those breadcrumbs and the pacing of them? Also, how does it feel when you're writing those clues into the story? Does it feel really obvious as you know how it turns out? And does that get in your way of progress?
Well, as I said, because I don't know the ending, and sometimes it happens that I didn't know there were clues myself. So I always remember in Apples Never Fall, there was a little line about somebody taking a banana from a child's bag. And as I wrote that, that was not meant to mean anything or be anybody in particular. It was just adding colour to the story. And then I thought afterwards, oh, that could mean this. And that's the best when that happens, because it flowed naturally as part of the story. So when I do have to go back, I don't enjoy it as much when I have to go back and put in a clue, because I don't want it to stand out. So I just have to keep just hope that I can get it right, and I just might have to work a bit harder on those clues than the ones that happen naturally.
Mm-hmm. Charlie from Snow Isle Libraries and Brittany from Cuyahoga County Public Library both want to know, how do you choose names for the characters, especially since most of your books have kind of these multiple POVs?
Well, I know I overuse some names, which are obviously favourites of mine. I do use the name Madeline far too often, maybe because I would have liked to name my daughter Madeline, but my husband didn't want it, so I just keep naming characters.
That's like what Alice forgot.
Yeah. Yes, she's got, and there's so many. I really can't use Madeline anymore. And the other thing I do is, because I do have too many characters, I'm very aware of not having too many characters whose first name begins with the same initial. So I'm trying to make it easy as possible for the readers to differentiate my characters. I also try and the names have to feel right for the characters. So if it's an older character, I will often just Google most popular names for people born in the year such and such, and that often gives me names. If it's a minor character, I will sometimes just look around my room and look at the books on the shelves and take a name from an author, take a first name, and maybe sometimes take a second name and combine that. I do love it when I've had a few charity auctions where I've given a character name so people can bid to have their own name used as a character.
That's
And I've
fun.
had some wonderful names. Yeah, so 9 Perfect Strangers, I was given the name Maria with a nickname Masha I'm not pronouncing it right, Dimachenko, so a Russian name, which from that name I created a whole character. And so that was great. Also, I had the name Simon Barrington in Apples Never Fall was another one that was a charity auction. And again, I thought that was such a great name, so I really love that. And I think, yeah, I think that's about all. Sometimes it's hard if a character's name sticks, and then I think, and then I do want to change the initial. It's awful because then I feel like so and so really is Rebecca or whatever.
Carol from Hancock County Library System wants to know, have you ever written a book around a personality type or certain characteristic of a person that you wanted to explore, which I guess you kind of pointed out, Madeline. But Carol finishes with, for instance, a wallflower or a psychopath, etc. So I guess personality type.
I don't know that I've ever written a whole novel about based on a personality type. I tend more to, it's a premise that is my beginning point. But then, yes, then I'm really interested in all sorts of personality types. I've probably had a few wallflowers actually, but I've never had anybody who's a complete psychopath. So I might keep that one for. I think that's harder because I'd like to find something, even with people who do bad things, I like to find one little thing that I relate to. So somebody, but probably that's the case with the psychopath, that I think they're meant to be really charming, aren't they? So I can probably find the charm.
Yeah. Theo from Meriden Public Library says, how much background do you create for characters, even if that information doesn't make it into the story? For instance, do you create families for characters that do not have families appear in the novel?
No, I know some authors, and I know some actors do that. They create whole backstories that allow them to play that role. But I think if I created a whole family, then I would think, so where are they? Well, then I would need, they'd have to be calling Auntie so-and-so, or they'd have to, if they were, I couldn't have them entirely off the page. They'd just need to be in my mind. So, yeah, I find, and I remember when I did a master's degree in creative writing, and I remember one exercise was writing a whole description of what would be in a character's handbag, and I found that sort of annoying. I don't know. I didn't enjoy that. For me, I'd prefer to just start writing them and making them move. And by then, I might know what's in their handbag. But I only care about that if their handbag's going to spill everywhere. Otherwise,
Okay.
I don't care.
Yeah. Bali is saying the characters in Here One Moment are more ethnically diverse, Allegra Patel, Ethan Chang, etc., than your previous novels, and therefore more reflective of Australia's multicultural landscape. Thank you for this. Was this a conscious effort to be more inclusive in light of conversations about representation, and were there challenges in writing these characters for you?
I have. It's not. I think if people looked back, I Vid in Truly Madly Guilty, and in Apples Never Fall, a detective. So it's not entirely true that it was a complete difference, but I guess in my very first novel many years ago, I think you do tend to write from your own point of view. So you write about characters who look and sound much like you. And of course, some people say that you should only write characters that look and sound much like you, because otherwise it's cultural appropriation. So it can be a difficult line to walk. So I guess in this book, though, it was such a wide group of characters, and it was on a plane, so where you're automatically having a whole lot of different people. If I'm writing about a family, like the Delaney family in Apples Never Fall, it's all obviously they're all going to be of one ethnicity. So I guess it just sort of happened naturally. And yeah, I just talked to people and had people do a sensitivity read to make sure that I was getting it right.
Mm-hmm. That's good. We've had a couple of questions from Bonnie and from Catherine about how your book titles are created. Do you choose them? Do you try to choose them? And the editor's like, no, not at all. How does that come along?
I've got lucky with the last few so Apples Never Fall, Here One Moment, and Nine Perfect Strangers were all mine.
Okay.
I remember Big Little Lies, I was calling it Sticks and Stones, but my publisher, I think they'd previously published a book with that title, so they didn't want that. So it was actually my editor, my American editor, who came up with Big Little Lies. And other times I can remember for my very first book, which was about triplet sisters. So I was calling it A Womb of One's Own, which I thought was amazing, but my editor was horrified. So then came up with Three Wishes. And then it was my son, actually, who pointed out that most of my books had three words. And actually, I had that, it just happened accidentally, and then I started doing it deliberately.
Okay, that's interesting. All the same. I like that. Holly from Lane Libraries is saying, how bound do you feel by genre and genre conventions? I.e., a mystery needs a dead body, a romance needs the lovers to separate and come back together. How bound do you feel by this when you write a story?
I don't feel bound by it. And I don't really consider that I'm writing a particular genre. I guess I notice sometimes that if I've veered a little bit into thriller territory, and readers liked that particular book, then they might come to the next book and think, oh, this is not thrilling enough for me if they're traditional thriller readers. And there's not really anything I can do about that. I can remember a review of my very second book that said this book can't decide what it wants to be, and I thought, well, just read it as a story rather than a particular genre. So no, I don't think that I do. I guess I know that I'm writing commercial fiction, and readers want entertaining read, but so maybe I'm aware of that. But I think that I'm writing as I naturally would write anyway.
That's great. I think if you started off thinking that you had to stay within certain conventions, it might sound contrived.
Although sometimes conventions can help, so you can write because you know the rules that you say in those conventions.
That's true.
And maybe I'm staying within conventions without even being aware that I am. But yeah, I don't have a set of rules that I'm consciously following.
The fate of writers' conventions. So you mentioned that you start your story with a premise. You start writing with a premise in mind. And Doreen is asking, how does Liane define a premise?
I guess it's what if, so what if this happened? And it's something that is then interesting enough that if you said to somebody, what if somebody stood up on a plane and started handing out death predictions, if they sort of, or that some people look a little bit appalled, but if they look interested enough, or if I'm interested enough to think, what if this happened, and it stays in my mind enough.
Tina is saying, I grew up in the same area of Sydney you did, and I get a kick out of seeing references to Sydney/Aussie stuff. How do you strike a balance between putting in local info and slang, but also being understood universally?
So I think probably actually as I've become more successful, I push back a little bit more and say if it makes sense in context, please leave it in. But on the other hand, I also don't want readers to be pulled out of the story. So, for example, I would say the boot of the car, and in America, say the trunk of a car. And so I don't want, if a reader's important scene, then you don't want them thinking, wait, what's going on here? But on the other hand, if I can't think of an example, but I remember there was a kookaburra, so that's an Australian bird, and I remember early on somebody saying, well, what's this? And I was thinking, no, I think they could work out that that's what it is, so let's leave it in. And slang I'll leave in too, unless it's so confusing that I might change the slang as well. But for the most part, I don't make many changes now, except for American spelling.
Mm. I quite like hearing light globe and things like that I
Oh,
wouldn't
that's
normally.
no, that's funny because I wasn't actually even aware that light globe, that you'd say light bulb.
Yeah, light bulb.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Another kind of neighborhood question. Jane at Roxbury Library says, "Hi, Liane. I love that some of you and your sister's books are set around the suburbs I grew up in. Not many people write novels set in the boring old hills district. Are there certain qualities about the hills that are conducive to writing domestic thrillers?"
um, yeah, I don't know. I think well for me, I don't think setting is my strength. So I just automatically write where I am right now. So I couldn't, even if I'd spent a few months in a more uh, exotic location, I'd still find it hard to write about it. So I just find it easier to write where I am, which is why all my books will always be set in the suburbs of Sydney. Yeah, even I wrote some children's books which were set in outer space, but the spaceship left from Sydney, so it's always Sydney.
We've had several people ask about film and TV adaptations of your work. Allison is saying, are you happy with the way that your books were turned into shows? If you could change any of them, would you, and how? And then Sydney is asking, what is the process of converting that material once edited? Are you involved in it heavily?
So I have not been involved. I made a conscious decision to step back from that process. I was asked with the very first adaptation, which was Big Little Lies, if I wanted to write the screenplay. But because I don't plan, and because part of the pleasure for me is finding out what happens, then I already know what happens. So and also I think it's a different medium. I understand that changes need to be made to make it work for that medium. And when people often will say to me, oh, I hope they don't change your book, I always say, but nobody can change my book because my book's still there and your experience of reading the book can't be changed. And also I know that every single person who reads my books has a slightly different experience. So they're taking things from their own imagination, from their own past. So if I describe a beach, they're probably seeing a beach from their own childhood. And so therefore I always think I think it's a mistake to think it needs to be 100% faithful to the book and then just put on screen. And having said all that, I absolutely believe it, but I know if I was involved, I would probably resist making those changes, which is why I think it's easier just to step back. And I've loved I've loved the adaptations. So no, I feel like I wouldn't want to say I want, and I've been so lucky with the casts. There have been such fantastic casts and such talented people working on them. So I feel like it would be wrong for me to say that I would want to change anything. Their own their own thing.
You watch every single one that's been adapted?
Oh yes, I watch them. I'm interested, and sometimes, and I have to admit, sometimes if they've added in a different a subplot that's nothing to do with me, I quite enjoy watching that because
Yeah.
I'm not looking to see the changes, and then I just get caught up in the story.
Yeah. Zia is saying, do you purposefully cast a hero and a villain? Is that part of the
Uh,
premise, I guess, when you're starting to write?
no, no, it's just the premise. No, because I don't think there's a villain
Yeah.
in this book. Yeah, you might initially think Cherry's a villain, but I hope by the end you might forgive her. So no, there's definitely not always. I'm trying to think of another book. Truly Madly Guilty, there was not a
Mhm.
villain. No, so there's not always a villain at all.
Yeah. Tessa is asking what if you had a specific inspiration for Cherry, for the Death Lady, especially like the way that she looked and her age. I know that you said that that's the kind of one of the first characters that you've done a whole life story for, so that probably
Mm,
had to be why she was older.
yes,
Did it
yeah.
start that way?
Uh, Well, she sort of started out as a mystery to me too, and then I got to know her. I can say that I gave a lot of my own mother's childhood in the suburbs of Sydney. I gave her childhood to Cherry, um, and my mother and her best friend. They both wrote little stories about little mini memoirs, so that was great to have their memoirs to
That's
um,
yeah.
be inspired by.
Yeah, that's really nice. Mike is saying, what mechanisms do you use to create tension and emotion as the story unfolds? I feel like the characters play off of one another's fear, anxiety, and even questions of mortality. Do you have any
Uh,
specific mechanisms that you use to create
yeah,
tension and emotion throughout?
I'm trying to think of one that I deliberately use. It sort of just seems to come as with the story.
Yeah.
I guess the only mechanism I would have is yeah, you want the reader to want more, but not to feel frustrated, to not feel that you're deliberately withholding information, but that that's naturally, and sometimes that's harder than others. In Truly Madly Guilty, everybody tells me I took them too long to tell them what happened at the barbecue. Um, and so it's trying to get the pace right is the difficult thing, where they're not just screaming, just tell me. They're involved enough in the characters. Um, yeah, I don't know. Maybe going back and cutting things. That's part of that adds pace if you have information that you don't need. So probably all I can think is cutting, and the cliffhangers at the end of a chapter. But it's nice when those happen naturally, and you don't want to do it every chapter because it starts to feel too formulaic.
Mhm.
And yeah, also probably I don't even want to think about the mechanisms, because then I feel like I want to, and they're all there in the back of my mind. But if I start thinking now, I shall build tension, then I don't think that would be good. That's probably the editing process is where that helps me. Where an editor says you've lost tension here, so then it normally means that I need to cut.
Mhm. Mhm. How long does it usually take you to write a book in general? I guess on average.
Uh, yeah, a year to 2 years. I'm
Okay.
at the moment having a book out every 3 years.
Okay.
Mhm.
Has
But
oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to say, but it's always hard for me to know exactly how long I took writing the book. How long did I just spend walking around thinking I'm writing a book? How long was I actually writing it? So I don't know.
Well, I once read that you tried to take time off after a tour and ended up writing a whole book anyway, right?
I did. Yeah, I was thinking I would take a whole year off and just write short stories, or to keep my writing muscles, to keep myself fit. Uh, and uh, and I said to my sister, "Give me a writing prompt, and I'll just write a short story from it." And so she texted me a little description of a bike lying on the grass with some apples to the and I just thought, oh, I'll just start writing a book instead. I'm not very good at short stories, so that just became the opening scene of Apples Never Fall.
Loveline says, I'm a new reader to you. Is there a particular order of your books that you recommend I should read leading up to Here One Moment?
No particular order at all, because they're all standalone books. I just feel like Three Wishes, which was my very first book, was written over 20 years ago, so that feels like it was written by a different person.
Mhm.
And the characters are all younger. Um, and it seemed like with Big Little Lies and The Husband's Secret, I went a bit more suspense driven. What Alice Forgot is one that people keep mentioning as their favourite, and that was maybe a bit more romantic, or a bit more um, women's fiction. And yeah, so I know any order is fine.
Mhm. Mhm. You talked about saying that your first book was drastically kind of different, and Karen is saying in your genre, characters and plot often can become repetitive. The story elements in Here One Woman are quite unique. I wonder, over the span of your career, have things got more challenging or easier for you to pull in different story elements that are more unique and staying true to
Uh,
your brand? Which it sounds like, I mean, you're staying true to your brand is staying true to what you want to write, is what I'm hearing.
mm, uh, so she's saying so my
Has
earlier
it been,
books were
has it been
repetitive,
more
as in
challenging?
using.
No, no, no. She's saying
Uh,
your genre
oh,
can become too repetitive, but you stay away
okay.
from that.
Well, that's lovely. Thank you for because otherwise I was thinking, gosh, thanks.
I would not close with a question like that.
I know. I was trying to be grown up and thinking, fair enough. Well, thank you very much. Um, Now I've forgotten the question because I was so caught up in the.
Basically, I think it boils down to what kind of challenges have you seen kind of go away? Have things been more challenging as you write more and more books, or
More, yeah. Um, and yeah, and sometimes, and there is that idea that a lot of people say every author is writing the same book over and over, and I
hmm,
do find that I do return to a lot of particular themes. So I know I return to the issue of childlessness because I so desperately wanted to have children. Um, and so I do tend to have a habit of sort of exploring that issue of somebody who, through circumstances, wants children and for whatever reason can't have them. Um, and so the challenge sometimes is to stop. So that's why I was probably ready to say, are you repeating yourself? Sometimes I think, no, you stop. You've said that. You've done that. And uh, but I think as I grow older, new things happen. So now I've got teenage children, so the teenagers are providing a whole wealth of potential material. Um, and I always did used to say, um, when I move into a retirement village, that'll be all that material, and then I'll do a murder mystery set in a retirement village. But of course, that's already off the table now because it's been done so amazingly. But yeah, I think life just keeps providing new material. Um, and even that there will always, because it's me, so there will be similarities. People have said that that I keep talking about banana muffins in my books. So I had one person write to me and say, please send me your recipe for banana muffins because obviously you love them. And I don't particularly love banana muffins. I think I just like the voluptuousness of those words, banana muffins. So I keep putting them in my books.
That's very interesting. Okay, so we're right at the top of the hour. The question that we always close with, that someone always asks, is what book are you reading right now that everyone should run out to their library and check out immediately?
Well, I've got this on top of, I've got my phone. I'll have to, I won't stand up. It's Claire Lombardo's latest book, and I'm trying to remember the title, and I'm really loving that. A book I read recently was Alice Wynn's In Memoriam, and I thought that was fantastic. And I also always, if I'm ever asked about recommendations for books, then I must mention my two sisters' books, Jacqueline Moriarty and Nicola Moriarty. Just look them up. They're both amazing.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I know that you are exhausted and you deserve a long, relaxing vacation. It's truly been a pleasure to speak with you for the last hour. Thank you.
Oh, it's been a pleasure for me too. Thank you. And thank you so much to everybody.
Yes, I want to echo that. I want to extend a huge thank you to all of our viewers for tuning in. Without your support, none of this would be possible. And so we thank you for choosing to spend your time with us. As a reminder, if you do scroll down below the live stream video, you will see a resources area, which contains a link to Liane's book, Here One Moment. We look forward to seeing you all again on October 2nd when we open the month with the Smithsonian scientists from the Tropical Research Institute to talk to us about the hidden world of bats, and again on October 9th with New York Times bestselling author Sylvia Moreno Garcia. I am Brandon Adler, and thank you for joining us.